Succeeding the ever-popular franchise, Donkey Kong 64 was the series' first leap into the third dimension, sporting not only a famous rap that even made it to the big screen, but for the first time featured 5 playable characters, and an infamous reputation for having achieved the Guinness World Record for the most collectibles in any game. However, the game had a long development cycle that started off all the way back on the N64's add-on, the 64 disk drive, and went through several iterations before we got the final product. From cut concepts, changed weapons, and even cut maps, today on Cut Content, on the first of this 2-part special, we shall explore the developmental history and beta unused content of Donkey Kong 64. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button and hit the like button too to further support us and keep creating new videos. Donkey Kong 64's development began roughly between late 1996 and early 1997, just as the team at Rare had finished Donkey Kong Country 3. To continue with tradition hot off the heels of their last game, the game was being conceived as a mix of side-scrolling 2.5D along with linear 3D platforming sections, much like the ever-popular Crash Bandicoot at the time. This was conceived for the 64 disk drive, allowing for the larger space for this game. However, with how big Donkey Kong Country levels had been prior, to replicate that in 3D space was a major challenge to the team that was just starting to learn how to work in a 3D space. This would have resulted in very short and unsatisfactory levels. Instead, looking at the success of Super Mario 64 that instead made giant levels with multiple objectives, the team decided to change course and head into that direction instead. Because of the switch, the game's team had some key members, namely Banjo-Kazooie's co-designer George Andreas, who tackled this game considering his veteran knowledge of making a successful 3D platformer. And because Banjo-Kazooie was a success, Rare's co-founder, Tim Stamper, wanted to replicate that game's success in making this 3D Donkey Kong game into a game focusing on item collection, this being something specifically instructed for George Andreas to focus on. Now, because Banjo-Kazooie had already borrowed the buddy system from Donkey Kong Country flawlessly, the team decided to take that and put it on crack by expanding the roster beyond the usual 2. At first, the idea was to only bring back characters that had already been in the series, but was quickly changed. This now included bringing in the new Kong, Lanky Kong, who at the time looked like a very generic orangutan, as well as a very different Tiny Kong, being male, wearing a fez and a vest, looking like a clear influence from Abu of Aladdin. Was eventually changed to female to prevent an all-male cast. Along with the inclusion of the new Chunky Kong and the returning Diddy and Donkey Kong, this made the complete DK crew. And with that, several familiar faces were set to return too, including Cranky Kong, King K. Rool, and even Wrinkly Kong, who was originally set to be alive in this game, like in the previous game. But when they needed a ghost character, they killed her off. Brutal. Eventually, by 1998, things were starting to change for the Nintendo 64. Many games were jumping ship from the 64 disk drive to becoming regular Nintendo 64 games out of the uncertainty and the delays of the console. This included games such as Zelda 64 and now Donkey Kong 64 too. Up to this point, the game hadn't been seen by the public yet, but finally in 1998, a promotional trailer was shown off. The game looked rougher, with the lighting being brighter and not as stylized. In fact, the UI was quite different, such as instead of having watermelons for health, there was a pie chart for health, a possible influence from Mario 64. As well, there appears to be a life counter back then. Here, they used Diddy's head as a placeholder, and found within the data of the final game, this was replaced by a balloon too. But eventually, the life counter was just removed entirely. On top of that, we even see one of the game's bosses, Mad Jack, in a very early form, looking much more like a murderous clown in a box. Not just that, but his level was entirely different, and not the big platforming challenge that it was in the final game. What stands out more is the fact that Donkey Kong had a realistic shotgun, something we'll return to in a bit. Nintendo Power Stars showing off the game, featuring Diddy facing off against Crash in the minecart level, with that same brighter appearance compared to the final games. But prior to E3, the games was suddenly announced to require the expansion pack, the first game on the console to do so, and would be packed in as such. Many weren't thrilled of this idea, as the ones who owned it didn't want to have a second redundant one. But this was as a result of how the game was suffering from a game-breaking bug where it would crash at random, and no one could figure out why. But swapping in the expansion pack to add that extra 4 megabytes of RAM solved the issue. Something that likely could have been evaded altogether on the 64 disk drive, in fact, as that also requires the expansion pack to run. But the game's true reveal came in May at E3 1999, where a playable demo was also now available. The game overall still looked rougher than the final game, with different textures and physics in various spots. Textures like these ground textures here, along with some slight differences in level design, such as the vines being higher off the ground. The demo itself featured a plethora of small and big differences. Some of these include a number of clearly in the works segments, like the early lighting of the Fungi Forest minecart level as seen earlier, shorter timers like the Get Out timer at only 10 seconds instead of 25, the banana porter pad being blank, different locations for objects like this banana porter being in front of Chunky's room instead, a single coin instead of the 5 green coins from the final game, a golden banana instead of the DK pad in Jungle Japes, an appearance of the life balloon as a collectible item for the then existing life counter as seen here, an additional bonus stage located at the top of the lighthouse instead of the switch, which is done by Lanky here instead of Diddy for this specific minigame, which in this case, the Mad Maze Mall is done by DK instead of Diddy, who does it in the final game. There were also different enemy placements, such as Clobbers being in the Frantic Factory, when he is only in Angry Aztec and Gloomy Galleon in the final game. The game's title being displayed in 3D and abbreviated at that to DK64, and an appearance of the DK rap, featuring Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong with those same realistic guns seen in 1998 still here. Which is now the best time to focus our attention to Rare's composer, Grant Kirkhope, who was taking over for David Wise of the series. Grant Kirkhope was planning to focus on making more darker tones compared to the lighter ones he made for Banjo-Kazooie. Of course, that didn't stay entirely true, as the team decided to make a very infamous intro to the game. Taking inspiration from Banjo-Kazooie's tongue-in-cheek humor, Kirkhope went on to making the DK rap. Originally made with Kong singing it and DK himself being the lead singer before switching to a rap song. While E3 was its first showcase, the next showing of the rap was at 1999's European Trade Show, which the song shows off all 5 Kongs and the song as we know, except for the same realistic weaponry that Donkey Kong sported in the first trailer, but as well as Diddy Kong clearly also using realistic pistols. At that trade show, however, was Donkey Kong's very creator, the legendary Shigeru Miyamoto. The demo at the show showcased the weapons both in the intro and in-game, where DK could pull them out, with actual shotgun sounds at that. The director George Andreas, who was playing the demo at the event, saw Miyamoto watching next to him, in utter horror. However, instead of telling Andreas to take the guns out entirely, he took out a piece of paper and drew what is a coconut gun to replace that very shotgun. Andreas was delighted by the idea and even decided to include coconuts as ammo inside. This being one of Miyamoto's few direct involvements with the game. But as the game's development continued, various pushes to fine-tune the game were being done. Most notably were the amount of collectibles that were being constantly ramped up. Co-founder Tim Stamper kept pushing director George Andreas to add even more. Whenever Andreas presented a build that included more, he kept asking for even more, all in the continuous attempt to further banjofy the game. In fact, the banjo connection was so strong that there was even a Banjo-Kazooie fridge in Donkey Kong's house originally. This goes to the point of them wanting to include a stop and swap system. What this was a method of powering down the game and then swapping the card out with the Banjo-Kazooie cart in only 30 seconds. Then by doing a task in Banjo-Kazooie itself, you power that down and then put the DK64 cart back on in 30 seconds once again, and then you got what is known as an ice key, as was found in the data of the game, to unlock something in the game. This all utilizing the N64's RAM to exploit this feature. Presumably, this function was going to be used with this very fridge here, but alas, one major problem. It was somewhat of a risky maneuver in the eyes of Nintendo, as this was more an exploit that they were tampering with and didn't want kids to accidentally swap to a different game that could potentially damage the other cart. This change was done so late in development that there were even official strategy guides that still pointed to an extra room in the Crystal Caves, for that extra room is believed to be what the ice key unlocks. And so ended the even closer connection of Donkey Kong 64 and Banjo-Kazooie. But this isn't the end of Donkey Kong 64's story. Next time, with the game released, a horde of cut elements were found in both the data of the game and even the leaked kiosk demo that showcases numerous cut objects, cutscenes, and even very over-the-top test rooms. So make sure to hit the subscribe button, for I'll plan to be back with more Donkey Kong and other games cut content soon. Hit the like button and comment below on if you preferred any of the earlier builds of the game instead. So everyone, thank you for watching!